encouraging people smugglers. Border Force patrols will also be taken over by the Royal Navy. Our Westminster editor Ben Kentish says Conservative MPs are divided on the idea.
Plays well with our supporters, it plays well with those who we promised to take back control of our borders. But there are a lot of Conservative MPs who are far from convinced that this is going to work. They say not only is it potentially unlawful and unethical, but also it is incredibly expensive. £120 million for a pilot that's effectively going to see 500 refugees sent to Rwanda to have their applications processed.
A new Deputy Chief Medical Officer for England has been appointed. The government says Dr Thomas Waite will replace Professor Sir Jonathan Van Tam. A US jury has convicted a British national over his involvement with a cell of the so-called Islamic State group. El Shafi El Sheikh was found guilty of 8 charges, including conspiracy to commit murder. The 33-year-old was a member of the cell known as the Beatles because of their British accents, which took hostages and killed them. A former Conservative MP says he will stand down after being found guilty of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy. Imran Ahmad Khan was thrown out of the party after being convicted earlier this week. Elon Musk's bid to buy Twitter outright has already been rejected by one major shareholder. 10 days after purchasing a 9% stake in the social media platform, the Tesla and SpaceX founder offered around £32 billion. But a Saudi investor says the offer is too low. Our business commentator, Declan Curry, says Mr Musk believes he can make some real changes.
Mr Musk is an unconventional business leader who dislikes some of the discipline and conventions that come with running major companies and has clashed repeatedly with financial regulators in the United States. He says that if he doesn't get his way, he might reconsider his position as a shareholder in Twitter.
In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 35 points at 76.16. The pound buys $1.30 and €1.20. LBC weather, patchy light rain in places in the north and west, a low of 5. A bright start in the east tomorrow, cloudier in the west. Patchy clouds with sunny spells by the afternoon, with the chance of the odd shower. A high of 20 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Lottie Morley.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Now, you know we like to have trade union leaders on the show every so often. Well, Dave Ward has been here, must be 5 or 6 times now, and he's back again like the proverbial bad penny, and we're delighted to see him. He's General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union, and in these hours, if you've heard them before, it's your chance to question one of Britain's leading trade union leaders about matters in the workplace, how well Labour are doing, because a lot of the unions seem to be a little bit unhappy with Labour at the moment. The fact that Frances O'Grady, the TUC General Secretary, has announced that she's leaving at the end of the year. You might want to ask about that. I wonder who might succeed her. We might come on to that in a bit as well. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. Let's start off, Dave, with a little chat about what's going on in the workplace at the moment. The last time we talked was probably 6 or 7 months ago. What's changed over the last 6 or 7 months?
I think that what's happened is that pressure has intensified on workers. I think that's everywhere. I think technology and the use of technology is intensifying work.
What do you mean by intensifying?
Well, what I mean by that is that, workload is just not fair. There's too much work, too few people trying to do the work. And I just think that, where we are today in the UK, I mean, let me come on to what I really sort of think that we should talk about tonight, which is, what are the answers to some of these problems? So, in our union at the moment, we're fighting hard on a number of fronts for our members. It looks like we're heading for some serious pay disputes. In addition, our members, we're all key workers, more or less, posties, telephone engineers. They've made huge personal sacrifices to keep services going, to keep the country connected. And the companies like Royal Mail, like BT, have made huge profits. And, we're in a position where, a company like BT that made £1.7 billion last year is putting insulting pay offers on the table. A company like Royal Mail that made £720 million last year, gave their shareholders £400 million, has yet to put an offer on the table on pay. And we're not going to accept that. You know, the situation that we see is that people are ready, I think, to fight for better pay, better terms, better conditions. And I'm seeing that right across the workplaces at the moment, even in areas that we don't represent members. In a wider context, I don't know about you, Iain, but I genuinely have never known a time, wherever you turn now, that life is so challenging and complicated for people. And I think millions and millions of people and their families, including many of our members, are really struggling. And the key question that we face today in the UK is, what are we going to do about it? And I don't think we can wait for political change. I think it's time for unions, for community organisations to come together, and the campaign that we've been pushing will take off now, and I'll talk about that, which is, you know, we want to fight for a new deal for working people and a new social settlement for the country.
What does that mean, though?
Well, what it means is that we've got to shift the balance of forces in the world of work. We've got to turn the race to the bottom to the race to the top. We've got to fight for higher pay, for a real living wage. We've got to fight for proper jobs with proper contracts of employment that give people decent sick pay, decent holiday pay, decent pensions. We've got to deal with the intensification of work. We've got to end fire and rehire and practices like you saw on P&O the other week. I mean, I find it astonishing.
I don't know if you know, I called for P&O to be nationalised.
Well, you're right, and you know, let's continue that discussion, because I think there's a lot of companies that should be nationalised if we're really going to start to sort of develop proper services for people again in the UK. So, you know, we also we're interested as well in our members in the workplace, but also the struggles that they're having outside the workplace. And politicians have failed. I mean, Johnson is just everything that's bad in politics, to me, is epitomised by Johnson. You know, he's got no integrity. He's treating people with utter contempt. And, you know, I don't think we can wait around anymore. Yes, you're right. I'm not convinced that Labour at the moment are putting forward solutions enough. The bottom line is they're not in power. And trade unions...
Are there actually, just on Labour, are there... I mean, I find it difficult to see Keir Starmer inviting lots of trade union leaders in for a coffee to sort of chew the fat. I mean, have you had a formal meeting with him in the 2 years since he's been leader?
Yeah, I've had several meetings with him, but... and
what do you get out of those? I mean, does he sit there and listen and nod, or does he actually say, yep, this is what we're going to do if we're in government, Dave?
Well, you know, these things are about trying to get the policies right for the Labour Party. So to ensure that when it comes to employment rights, that we produce better employment rights for workers, that if they were in power, that they take action against some of the things that we've seen, like the situation in P&O. But, you know, I want to repeat this. I'm not in a place, and I think a lot of trade union leaders are not in a place at the moment where we think that you put all your eggs in the basket of waiting for a Labour government, whoever it leads.
But the reality is, you're only going to get anything done if a Labour government comes in. So surely you should be.
No, I don't agree with that.
Really?
No, I think you get things done by mobilising working people, by mobilising people in the country behind serious campaigns. We've got a rally on the 18th of June. I expect to see you there, Iain, and many of your listeners, where we're saying enough's enough. And we'll be setting out in due course all of the key demands.
Can I give my apologies in advance?
No, I think you're going to be there, Iain.
Unfortunately, I've got a previous engagement at David Beckham's house, believe it or not.
What, on the 18th of June?
Yeah. Sorry.
I don't believe you.
No, it's true. I'll show you my diary in the break.
So, well, we won't be changing it, so you'll have to give Beckham a miss.
I don't think he's going to be there, to be honest.
So, look, you know, this is a serious campaign. The TUC have come together now. The first time, I think, for decades, where we're having serious conversations about how we work together to mobilise working people,
but what
how
does
we work with
what
community
good does a rally
organisations.
do? I mean, it's not going to change the law, is it?
On its own, it does nothing. But hitting the streets at the moment, I think, to actually show this government that people are in the place, which I believe they are increasingly, that enough is enough and that we want to see better for working people. We want to see better for our families. We want to rebuild the welfare state as we knew it in this country. And, I think
again,
from
you can
that...
only do with a change of government.
Sorry?
You can only do that with a change of government.
No, I don't believe that.
Well, what can you do? You can't. You're not going to persuade the Conservatives to do anything.
First of all,
therefore, you've got to do it with Labour.
So what we do? No. Them days of just sitting waiting for political change. The situation's too serious, and I think people know that. And actually, I'm advocating that we do hit the streets, that we do have a serious campaign, and we build, if you like, a new social movement in the UK, supported by trade unions, supported by community organisations, community leaders, food bank organisations, renters associations.
So basically what you're saying is, well, Labour's not doing this, so we're going to have to.
I'm saying that we've got to change things because this government is not looking after ordinary working people, and you know that. I've heard you say that in recent...
Our Labour?
Well, Labour ain't in power. I'm not here to...
But if they were... I mean, my point is that we could have had... If we'd had this conversation in 1994-95, when John Major was Prime Minister and Tony Blair had just become leader of the Labour Party, we could have had an identical conversation. But the fact is, Tony Blair got into power, he won an election, and he did things which would have benefited your members. Introduction of the minimum wage, for one thing. Now, there may be lots of things you wish he had done, but that he didn't. But you would surely have to say that a Labour government is better for your members than a Conservative government. I mean, I think there have been exceptions to that over the years, but let's not go down that road. But in the future, you're only going to get changes in the welfare state, changes in working conditions if a Labour government is in power. It's a simple truth.
No, I don't agree with that. I mean, I want to see a Labour government, and I hope it's a Labour government that is serious about change. I'm yet to be convinced about that. But what I am absolutely clear on is that we're not putting up with what's going on in the country at the moment, both in the workplace, outside the workplace. And I believe that there will be millions of people who will support the type of campaigns that we're going to move forward. And I think campaigns do have an impact. And it will lead. I mean, I've got to be clear here. I think you'll start to see more forms of collective action taking place. And it will lead to change.
Strikes?
Strikes are legitimate things if members vote for them. And I think it's time that people are not, I don't know how, sort of close you are to what's going on in the world of work at the moment.
Believe it or not, I work.
Yeah, I know you do, yeah. But you work in here, and I'm saying to you that out there at the moment, life is really challenging.
I have absolutely no doubt about that.
You will be there on the 18th of June.
I'm probably more in touch than you think because I talk to people every day. So I do know about the cost of living crisis. And just because I personally might not be affected by it in the way that others are, that doesn't mean to say that I don't know what's going on. But the problem is when you talk about mobilising people and strike action, a lot of our listeners will think, oh yeah, here we go again, back to the 70s, typical unions.
You can't keep dining out, can you, on back to the 70s? And actually, there will be some people...
Conservatives have for 40 years.
Well, they have, and that's why it's got to stop as well. Unions are the closest organisations to the reality of what's happening to working people's lives, the reality of what's happening to people's families. And we are coming together, and, we will drive this campaign forward, and it will lead to change, and we are going to mobilise working people. And I think it's time to end, all of these debates about, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. Actually, you can.
I mean,
there's lots of evidence.
As if you're talking about some sort of general strike.
I wouldn't rule out a general strike. We've had that conversation before. No, I wouldn't rule it out at the moment. No. But I believe I believe in building things. Yeah. And I believe
general strike destroys things.
No, it doesn't. No, it's a very one-sided view.
What would it achieve?
I'll tell you what destroys. I'll tell you what destroys things at the moment. The Prime Minister, he destroys things.
Okay, but what would a general
there's
strike
plenty
achieve?
of CEOs in this country who destroy industries because they're only interested in profit, not in the workers who are loyal to them. And it's time for change, and people
Okay.
will support this. Believe me, we're going to mobilise people. We're going to push this campaign out. We're going to go out to towns and cities, by the way, not just the rally on the 18th. We're going to go out and, with other community organisation leaders, hold meetings to prepare people. And this is not going to be a one-off rally. This is the start of a serious campaign. And I'm saying to you, in about 18 months, you'll have me back on here and you'll start to see how powerful that force has become.
But you almost sound as if you're pushing for a general strike. And I ask you again, what positive can come out of a general strike rather than a negative?
Iain, I believe in building support for change. And I'm a realistic person in the sense of you couldn't go out and call a general strike tomorrow. And I'm not advocating at this point in time a general strike. I'm saying
the fact you're even talking about it is quite interesting.
You spoke about it as well, and I'm saying honestly, why would you rule that out at the moment? Things are really, really difficult for people now. I don't want this to be about we're starting a campaign and we can't achieve the objective of a general strike, so we won't have it. That's not where I am. I'm talking about seriously engaging workers right across the country. I'm talking about unions setting out clear and shared demands. I'm talking about taking those demands to employers right across the country and galvanising support for people.
I'm trying to imagine Frances O'Grady saying the words that you've just said, and I can't imagine her saying that. Now, she's stepping down as General Secretary of the TUC at the end of the year. She announced it last week. Is that a job you fancy?
I've got a job at the moment. Iain.
I know that. That's a politician's answer. You usually give me straight answers.
I really do like the job. The process is a process that we'll go through. There's a sort of internal basis of how that works.
How does it happen?
I'll be honest with you, it's 10 years since it last happened. Frances has done a great job. And actually, Frances is very supportive of this campaign. She's going to be leading that campaign before she retires. So, Frances would agree with what I'm saying now.
You would agree with me, though, I think, that you're using slightly more radical language than she would use. And I wonder whether this is just being an old cynic to court popularity in the union movement, to say, look, I'm going to return the TUC to a more traditional, sort of more confrontational approach, and that might help you if you were to stand to succeed her.
Iain, let me tell you, the policies that we've been pursuing, which have been put to the TUC General Council, put to the TUC Congress, we've been putting them for 4 or 5 years now. And I think what's happened is that people are beginning to understand that you can't win some of these important changes on your own as one union. So this is not about my position. This is about working people. This is about how you really do create a situation where you can bring about change in the workplace, outside the workplace. And, it happens in lots of other countries, Iain. And, it should happen in the UK now.
So I'm going to take that as you're not ruling yourself in, you're not ruling yourself out of succeeding Frances O'Grady.
I'm not standing to be General Secretary of the TUC. I'm General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union.
But, people might persuade you over the course of the next 6 months or so.
Well, you never know, do you? But that's not the plan. Frances, we didn't know Frances was retiring. The policy was already set well before that.
Okay. Right, we're going to come to your calls in a moment. 0345 6060973. If you've got something to do with your working environment, the workplace, health and safety that you think the trade unions ought to be concentrating on, please give us a call. Dave Ward will be here with me until 9 o'clock. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
21 minutes past 8. Dave Ward is here, General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union. Let's go to a call. Sean is in Stevenage. Hello, Sean.
Hi. Yeah, first of all, can I just say it's always a pleasure listening to Mr. Ward. He seems to be, to me, the one that's speaking for working people and the only one. And just the first part of the point that I want to make here is to unusually for me disagree with Mr. Ward about Frances O'Grady and her leadership of the TUC, because frankly, she's just forgotten us.
Why do you think that?
Silence is deafening. Their silence is deafening. We've had year upon year of working people having to pay the price of successive governments' failures, and the TUC are meant to speak up for us. They're meant to defend us, and there's no voice there. There's only people like Dave Ward and others that are prepared to take a stand and say, right, workers come together, try and defend one another, and try and get companies and politicians to understand the real pain that we're going through. So I disagree with Dave's analysis on that, but my primary question here to Mr. Ward was, given that the country's now, to put a finer point on it, in a state of flux with raging inflation, lower pay, the imposition of fire and now not even rehire, imposed pay, for example, by BT and Royal Mail that Dave spoke about, a government in crisis. Is this not providing the kind of employment culture in this country that will allow companies to exploit the law, exploit workers even more, and eventually lead to what some would say is the real government agenda of low pay, no job security environment, so that companies would invest in Britain for those very reasons?
Okay.
So that's my point to Mr.
Let's
Ward.
put that to Dave.
Yes, Sean, I agree with your analysis. Not on Francis. I think there's lots of difficult situations that the TUC face. I mean, one of the things I would make clear is that the TUC is only as strong as its affiliates. And what is really good news is that the affiliates have agreed now to all come together to campaign collectively in a way that we haven't done for decades. And that is the upshot of the New Deal for Workers campaign and the campaign for a new social settlement in the UK. And the fact that trade unions are very clear that we need to lead it as trade union leaders with community organisations, with ordinary people, without politicians being on that platform, I think explains, how serious we've become about these issues now. Your point about, why this agenda has taken place over so long is absolutely true. Let's be clear here. The UK economy is already founded on insecure employment, growing in work poverty, and that's been an agenda for some time, and that's why we've got to do something about it now. And I repeat this point. Johnson, levelling up is a phony agenda for Johnson. We're talking about the real levelling up agenda, and people need to get behind this campaign. And, I think people are ready to do it. I disagree with Iain around his view of these things won't bring about change. Actually, in my experience, when working people come together, there's more chance of making change happen.
Look, campaigns can make change happen. I think Barry Gardner has done a brilliant job on fire and rehire, and I think there are many, many Conservative ministers and MPs that agree with him because he's built a coalition of support rather than sort of manning the ramparts and bringing people out on strike. I think that has been a much more effective way of bringing about a change in the law. Now, that change hasn't happened yet, you might justifiably say, but I think it will. You look at what's happened with P&O, where I think you would have been surprised. I mean, here's some of the things that Grant Shapps has been saying. You wouldn't expect a Tory minister to say some of those things.
Yeah, but they can bring laws forward now. They could have done that before. They've had years of ruling out those sort of situations. I mean, we actually came into contact with a guy who held the Zoom call. He worked for Royal Mail, and I'm absolutely certain with the previous CEO of Royal Mail as well, who brought him in, a guy called Andrew Good. That was the policy that they wanted to introduce
as
in Royal Mail.
appropriately named as Andrew Adonis.
And in the end, he left Royal Mail. We made it clear the CEO left Royal Mail. Why did that happen? Well, workers came together and said, we're not putting up with these type of policies.
But do you not think at the moment that workers in many sectors actually have a lot of power, maybe subliminal power, in a way that 5 or 6 years ago they didn't, because there is such a shortage of workers in many sectors. So that therefore means that, by the natural laws of economics, supply and demand, the wage levels are going up in some areas, not all, but in some.
I think that we need to absolutely reevaluate pay in the UK. One of the things that I always look at is, it seems to me that the jobs that you need that give something back to society always tend to be lower paid jobs. And, we've got to increase the pay. We've got to bring about better terms and conditions for workers everywhere, And if you don't do this at the moment, you will end up with the situation that Sean said increasingly. This is going to be a low-wage economy. It already is, apart from, the few. And, I keep coming back to it, Ian. We're going to do something about this.
OK. Sean, thank you. Let's go to Mike in Beverley. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Ian. Yeah, just talking specifically about this year, 2022, do you think that the government underestimated with its COVID policy what effect the wave of COVID would have on the workforce and the economy?
I think that whether they underestimated or not, to be fair, it was a situation that none of us had really experienced before. But what has definitely happened is that it's affected workers in a huge way. I represent a lot of members who worked throughout the pandemic, who were all designated as key workers, and I know that they've made huge personal sacrifices during that period. And what's happened is that work has intensified. They've been dealing with, at the same time, the changing nature of work, and there's plenty of that going on across the UK, different sectors and different companies at the moment, and they haven't been properly rewarded for that. And, for me, what we've got to do, first of all, is fight for higher pay for our members, and then we've got to build that into a campaign that changes and shifts the balance of forces in the world of work, in how the economy operates, and across society.
OK. Question from Alison in St Albans. Please ask Dave which country he would rather live in. Where do they get it right according to his beliefs?
Where do they get it right?
That's a good one, isn't it?
Well, you got a fair point, Alison, is that there's not many places in the world at the moment that you would say are getting it right. And I think that's because, things are out of kilter in terms of power and wealth right across the world. There is a structural imbalance of power and wealth in the world of work, in how the economy operates, and across society. And our job is to defend working people and advance, the terms and conditions of working people. And I'm saying it's not about where I want to say it's being done right. I'm recognising that there's huge problems, and we've got to do something about it collectively. It's about building collectivism for me.
If I was you, the answer that I would have given to that question... You would have said France. No, I wouldn't. I would have said Australia. Because Australian unions hold much more power than I think in most other similar capitalist countries.
I have to say that the focus for me is to make sure that we do something about it in the UK.
I'm sure it is. We'll come to more of your questions in a moment. If you would like to talk to Dave Ward, where does the CWU sit in the league table of unions in membership terms? It's quite high up there, isn't it?
We're about the 5th biggest union in the UK.
So if you've got any questions about work, the workplace, he'd love to hear from you. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:31, time for the LBC News headlines with Lottie Morley.
More than 160 charities and campaign groups have called for the government to scrap plans to send asylum seekers who cross the English Channel in small boats to Rwanda. Boris Johnson insists the scheme, which will detain and fly migrants 4,000 miles away, is not lacking in compassion. A new Deputy Chief Medical Officer for England has been appointed by the government. Dr Thomas Waite will replace Sir Jonathan Van Tam after he stepped down in March. A US jury has convicted a British national over his involvement with a cell of the so-called Islamic State group. El Shafi El Sheikh was found guilty of 8 charges, including conspiracy to commit murder. LBC weather, patchy light rain in places in the north and west, a low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC. Iain Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
8:35 on LBC. Dave Ward, General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union, is here. Craig in Ayrshire says, I work for one of the very large budget hotels in the UK. I'm not a member of a union because no one else is. Is there any point joining a union if I'm the only one?
Well, it's about building membership, Craig. Become a union member. I would urge everybody really to join a trade union, and I think one of the things that will come out of the campaign that we're talking about is that we will grow union membership across the UK. Where you're in employment that's insecure, companies sometimes put enormous pressure and bring in union breakers to stop people joining unions. But you know, this is a moment where you will definitely benefit your working life by joining a union. We can then bring others in, and we will do that across the whole piece. But what I would say to you, Craig, is get behind the campaign first. So when the New Deal for Workers campaign comes about, it'll be going to Scotland, it'll be going to different parts of the UK. Go to two of those meetings, and you will find other people that will be in a similar place to you who want to join trade unions, and we'll build support from there.
And how much does it cost?
Well, it's very different across different unions. I haven't got all the figures out. Ours is different as well, depending on whether you work full-time hours, part-time hours.
Full-time.
Full-time, I think ours is about £3.70 a week now. which is a really good deal in terms of what you can buy for £3.70 a week. But isn't it about building collectivism now? Isn't it about saying to people that enough is enough in what's going on in this country, in the way that employers are exploiting situations like P&O? Don't people want to get behind that? Aren't there many of your listeners out there that are willing to come to that demonstration on the 18th, willing to go to meetings around the country and help build this movement for change?
Okay, Jürgen is in Balham. Hello, Jürgen.
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
My question, many European countries now have legal minimums on the number of disabled employees that companies over a certain size have to have. UK's never had anything like it, and I just wondered whether that is something you would support and have a view on why it's not part of our law.
I think that you can see examples increasingly where disabled people should be able to go into good jobs, and I would support that, Jürgen. I think it's always difficult to, create the legislation for it without pushing the companies themselves to start employing more disabled workers. I think there is evidence that has increased, and we would support that. And certainly, in certain companies, I think some companies are quite good at that, to be perfectly honest with you. So it's not just about waiting for the law to change there, it's about unions pushing that support for disabled workers as well.
And Jürgen, have you got any examples of companies who actually do a good job in this area?
Unfortunately, not very many. There are companies who, to David's point, are starting to address it. But the thing I can't understand is when we have a skills shortage and we have a staffing shortage in the UK, but you look at across disabled groups, and I'm totally blind, 90% of people like me are unemployed. 74% of all visually impaired people are unemployed. 94% of people with a learning disability are unemployed. And the reality is companies just do not yet do enough, because they say they need staff, but they aren't yet ready to make the adjustment and the adaptations to the workplace to allow disabled people to be part of it.
As somebody who's said 100% visually impaired, am I even allowed to use the word blind nowadays? Is that...
if you get 3 blind people in a room, you'll get 3 different views.
Give me examples of jobs that you think that blind people could do but aren't being given the opportunities to do.
So many. So police forces, for example, there's a strong example recently of a young woman police force that I won't name, went through an entire application process, got to the end of the process, was successful in getting the job, and then was told at the end of it, actually, sorry, we can't give you the job, our IT system's not accessible. This happens...
That's not acceptable,
no, it's not acceptable, is it?
This happens up and down the country. This isn't just the police, it's just one example. This is companies all over.
There will be jobs, depending on your disability, there will be jobs that you can't do. And I think everyone, presumably, you would agree, has to recognise that. But where... if you're a big company and you've got the resources, you've surely got to make an effort to do it. If you're a small company with 5 employees, fine, I can see that it's more difficult to do that. But if you employ hundreds of people, it ought to be part of the HR remit to encourage the employment of more people with disabilities, surely.
You would hope so, but ironically, the reality is there's more examples of small companies making adjustments because they have a smaller framework and a smaller outset. And it is one of the few government programmes that's actually very good, access to work, in providing disabled people with the funding, or their employers with the funding to get adjustments that are needed. But unfortunately, again, either a lot of disabled people look at companies and say they'll just never hire anyone like me. And often the reality of the experience people have when they go through job processes is they're just treated unfairly.
Jürgen, thank you very much for calling in. Let's go to Mark in Darlington. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for having me and coming on to the show and speak to you and your listeners. I just want to set a little bit of context behind the question I want to ask Dave. And the context is, we're on the precipice of personal finance for, me, my colleagues, and all trade union members out there. Inflation is running at circa 7%, CPI, 9% RPI. I work for one of the companies that Dave's union represents, which is BT. And the leadership there, I'm afraid to say that they're just so out of touch with the real world, with what's going on. I personally wrote to Philip Jansen, the CEO. He's even contacted me directly over the telephone. And from the discussions I've had with him personally, amount to a person that doesn't know what's going on in the real world, doesn't know or understand how those at the lower echelons of the pay scale are feeling this cost of living crisis. And there's a lot of talk around strike action. Now, in terms of the strike, my question to Dave is, have we considered a potential work to rule, which essentially is working rules and hours exactly in order to reduce the output efficiency? Now, in a particular area that I work, how that would look is a potential ban on overtime. That would seriously reduce the output and the efficiency of the area of BT that I'm in. Rather than strike action or going straight to a strike, is that something that our union should consider?
Dave?
Mark, yes, I think it is. I think you always have to consider basically what puts the maximum pressure on the company with the minimum sacrifice from your workers. I also think, though, that sometimes you can't avoid, if you're, unhappy with a company, the best way to demonstrate that is in an industrial action ballot. And often the evidence is that the pressure of that ballot, once people vote on that, often persuades companies who are not in touch. Now, what's interesting, what you said, you've actually had conversations with the CEO, Philip Jansen.
Is that more than you have?
Actually, I haven't spoken to Philip Jansen previously, but we will be doing soon. Well, because my job is overall in the union, and different people deal with people like Philip Jansen in their own sort of structures within the union. So it hasn't come to that point yet, but it will fairly soon. And one of the things I would say to you is I think it's fairly clear that Philip Jansen CEOs across the UK are completely out of touch with the reality of work today. I think they place no real loyalty on the workforce. They place no value on what the workforce has achieved during the pandemic. And they're totally occupied with getting profits to shareholders.
But you wouldn't want to generalise, would you? You cannot say that all chief executives look at it in that way.
I didn't say that. I said there's a lot of CEOs in the UK who I think are completely overpaid. I don't think they
a lot of people think
create things anymore. I don't think they build things anymore. I think they break things up. And what they always focus on is the bottom line profit, not looking after the workforce. That's the priorities that I'm sure a lot of your listeners who are in work will know that their companies,
not just for their shareholders, but to be able to reinvest as well.
Well, yes, Ian, but not in the way that you exploit workers, and that's what BT have been doing. And I think our members know that, and I think they will support the union once we have a ballot for industrial action.
Mark, quick response from you.
Sorry, what was that, sorry?
I just said quick response to what Dave has said.
Well, like I say, I agree with every word that Dave says. I mean, in terms of the response that Philip gave me, the most telling part of it was, why not wait until next year? And the problem is, we can't wait until next year. We're running at, record high inflation. It's, a 30-year high now, and it hasn't even accounted for the fact that energy prices have gone up this month. They're going to go up again in October. There are members that I've spoken to who are giving up the family cat because it's one less mouth to feed. This is the level of the cost of living crisis that we're at now. It's not about not being able to afford a luxury here or a salary sacrifice scheme there. It's the fact now. There's nothing left to cut. These companies, these CEOs, they have the tools at their disposal to be able to resolve this themselves. We can't just rely on the Chancellor. Of course, the Chancellor has to do something. But these companies, these CEOs, they have the tools at their disposal to fix this problem for its employees, for our members. The problem is they're just not choosing to do it.
Okay.
Against the background, Mark, of £1.7 billion of profit last year. So you're absolutely right. They're not making the right choices.
Are they reinvesting that money then?
They will be
obviously
reinvesting
some
some
goes
of
to
it,
shareholders.
but
Completely
look,
get that.
You can't just keep saying that. What are you suggesting, Iain? That workers don't get pay increases?
No, I'm not. I'm absolutely not suggesting
So
that
therefore,
at all.
the money's there to reinvest in the company. The money's there to build the future of the company, but the money's also there to pay workers a substantial increase this year.
Mark, thank you very much for your call. We'll come back to your calls in just a moment. It's 8:47.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 10 to 9 on LBC. Dave Ward, General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union, is with me. Let's move on to Mark in Milton Keynes. Lots of Marks tonight. Hello, Mark.
Hello, David and Iain. What about the unemployed? There's over 9 million. And
what?
We're looking for full-time
9
jobs.
million? Where are you getting your stats from?
Right. 5.9 on universal credit, 2.4 million on legacy benefits, plus you've got the additional carers, etc., etc.
I mean, that's not the way that unemployment is counted, is it?
Well, there's 5.9 million on universal credit and 2.4 million on legacy benefits.
A lot of people on universal credit are in work.
Well, that's the numbers that were given during the pandemic. Because it was 2.9 million that were on universal credit. Then there was the additional people that lost their jobs.
Well, okay. What's your question?
My question is full-time jobs. the thing is that we're told that there's 29,000 jobs available, but majority of those are not full time.
A lot of people don't want to work full time, though.
There's a lot of us that do.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. But what's your question for Dave?
Well, it's the actual element of full-time jobs rather than just a job, as he was saying. And also, I agree with the whole idea of not being party political, is actually just represent the workers.
Dave, that's an interesting point, but it sort of goes back to something we talked about earlier, where, I mean, we do live in a very different economy now, where more people do prefer to work part-time. There are lots of people that would prefer a full-time job to working part-time. I completely understand that, but you accept that it's very different to, say, 1985, 1995.
Well, we're not against part-time workers, and you're right, Ian, some people do choose. I think one of the problems is that what Mark's alluding to is that a lot of companies actually turn full-time jobs into part-time jobs. And then you get the scenario that you've got in the UK where people have to work 2 or 3 different jobs in order to make a living. So I think that where you can sustain a full-time job, you should do. But equally, of course, we should have part-time working. I think the problem is people's reward for working. And in work poverty, I think I saw some figures the other day that 68% of the families that are deemed as being in poverty now are actually also in work. Somebody in the household is in work. And that says everything about why this campaign for a new deal for working people, a new social settlement for the UK, needs to take off. And I am going to convince you, Ian, that you should be there on the 18th of June. And I'm hoping that a lot of your listeners tonight will also be there, and that you'll start to join trade unions.
Have you told us where it is yet?
It's going to be not far from here, around Trafalgar Square. But go to some of the meetings that are going to be advertised in your own local towns and cities, because trade union leaders, community leaders are coming together, and we're going out to meet people.
Okay.
In a lot of the deindustrialised towns where people are really struggling as well. This is a moment to come together. And surely people must now realise that this government is not going to come to our rescue.
Is this rally just a CWU rally or other unions as well?
No, I've been trying to explain that to you, Ian. You've been watching the football, I think, while I've been talking to you.
Surely not.
No, it's the whole of the trade union movement. The TUC is calling this rally. The TUC is supporting this campaign. And we will be working with community organisations. This will make a difference. I hope you have me back on here, because we are going to carry on talking about this. And we will mobilise working people.
Right, let's go to Paul in Winchester. Hello, Paul.
Yeah, good evening, Ian. Thanks for having me on.
Not at all. What would you like to say?
Yeah, Ian, I think listening, this is a fascinating conversation, and I think Dave's making some really valid points. And he keeps mentioning the word collectivism, which interests me, because I sort of sense that one of the things that is causing the problem is that we've moved away from massive employers to an economy which is built around, I think I once read, 80% of the employers in the UK are small businesses. And so I just wondered how Dave visions the trade union movement sort of getting a hold of that group of people and sort of using their strength to get a better deal for the working man.
Yeah, it's a good challenge. Is it Paul or Ian?
Paul, yeah.
Paul, yeah. And I think that what we've got to do now is recognise that there are different workplaces. So, some people don't work in workplaces, obviously, now. And we've got to use digital technology in order to, get people on board for campaigns. I think you've got to use whatever you can. And you picked up the word building collectivism, or the words. That is something that I'm passionate about. Is something that I think society needs. And actually, I've seen a lot of growing evidence that people are ready to do that. I mean, during the pandemic, some of the organisations that started supporting people in their local communities, that was collectivism. Going out on a Thursday night for the clap in support of key workers, that was collectivism. And I sensed at that time that people really did understand what was going on, and they wanted to contribute to that. What we've got to do is take that and build on it, and make sure that we do actually bring people together in this country, rather than this force-fed, deliberate tactics of keep dividing working people, keep dividing all people, which you see from this particular government. You've seen it again today, with Johnson and Harry's play to a particular base on the Rwanda policy. And this is not right. And I think people are ready to come together. I think they're ready to be led in a way that people understand the real problems that they're facing both in the workplace and outside the workplace, and connecting those two issues.
Is Keir Starmer coming to the rally?
Keir's got to earn the right to come to the rally.
What do you mean? He's the leader of the Labour Party.
Well, I've said to you at the start, Ian, this is about trade unions leading this. This is about community organisations.
Why did the Labour Party emerge from the trade unions? I mean, has he not been invited?
Not at this stage, no.
He has a busy diary. He's leader of the opposition.
I'm saying to you that, seriously, politicians need to earn the right to come to that rally.
On.
No, they do. They do. And, from where I'm sitting, what we need at the moment is ordinary people leading these type of campaigns, trade unions leading these type of campaigns. I'm a Labour Party member. I want Labour to win. But I'm being serious with you. I want to see a vision from Labour that is lined up with what we're talking about.
I find it inexplicable that you wouldn't have been, or somebody wouldn't have been onto his office to say, look, we're doing this rally on the 18th of June. Love to have Keir there. Could be the next Prime Minister. He'll meet a lot of interesting people. I mean, why not? What's not to like?
Let's see how it develops, and I'm sure Keir, if he's listening to this, he may come on to us, and we'll have a chat about that and see how things perform over the next few months.
You don't seem as if you make him very welcome.
It's not about making people welcome. It's about making a serious change to society, led by trade unions, led by community organisations. And, the politicians that have failed us, most notably Johnson and the Tories, we're not waiting for the change from them.
I can see
anymore.
why you're not inviting Boris Johnson. But Jane in Clapham, final text. What sort of impact has Sharon Graham at the helm of Unite had? She's tried to move away from the Labour obsession and seems to be picking a fight with Keir Starmer over Coventry too.
Well, I think Sharon's agenda is a good agenda because she's talking about, getting back to the workplace. And I'm sure Sharon supports the agenda that we're talking about. But at the same time, unions will have different disputes. One of the things that is fair to say is that, yes, there's a dispute going on in Coventry at the moment. I don't know all the details of it. It happens to be with a Labour council. But there's hundreds of councils run by the Tory government at the moment that have outsourced all of the work and have gone for the lowest possible terms and conditions for years now. So let's take some of them on as well.
Dave, thank you very much. Always good to see you. We'll have you back very soon. I think we ought to have Sharon Graham on again soon. Last time we did the Unite debate, it turned out to be quite an evening, didn't it, if you remember that? Coming up in the next hour, if a Ukrainian arrived in Britain on a dinghy, would you be happy for them to be sent to Rwanda? And if not, why are you then happy for Afghans and Syrians to be sent there? 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. More than 160 charities and campaign groups have called for the government to scrap plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Boris Johnson has defended the scheme, which will see migrants seeking refuge in the UK